So now I'd like to move on to the next session, the Urban Food Agenda with Costa. Where's Costa? There he is, over that side. So a bit of background about Costa. Costa's a Greek-Australian landscape architect and television personality who has an all-consuming passion for plants and people. His personality is as big as his beard. Born in Sydney, grown up in North Bondi, he was in his grandfather's market garden that Costa developed a love of nature. He studied landscape gardening at the University of New South Wales and became interested in issues of sustainability. In December 2011, the ABC announced Costa as the new host of Gardening Australia. Outrage. Welcome, Costa. Looking forward to hear what you've got to say.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for having me over here in Perth. I realise I've come from the dark side, but it's always a pleasure to spend that 5 hours in the plane and just, the world's turned off. I don't have the phone ringing. I just think about what I need to think about, and it was wonderful to come and have an evening last night with the other speakers. So. Marion, Julian, Peter, Rachel, Andrew, Neil, Rod, Heather, Wendy, Jeff, Tristan. I mean, what a feast! I've filled up almost two of these. My table would vouch for it. I've just been writing so much down because for me that's what it's about. It's how we communicate. It's how we get these ideas across. It's the language we use. Even, the issues around, well, what is food security and how do we talk about that Jeff brought up. But I think about what we've traversed today, and there's certainly a lot more questions than there are answers. But that's the best part about it. If we don't get together and talk about this, if we don't project food future as a word, well, then it will just get consumed, literally. Now, I just wanted to welcome you to the conference Black Spot, the 3:50 to 4:10 slot. Most people have been concentrating for quite a few hours now. You've had a little bit of a sugar hit, which is not going to last very long. And my only disappointment is that I don't have a mobile mic, so I can't come and harass you too up close. Although if I use my best ABC projection voice, I reckon I could get it across the room. The other thing I wanted to say was that was a wonderful welcome today. The resonance of that moment just rattled my cage, and I think that's really special that as a group we continue to just make this part of the new culture going forward, that is what we do. There is an acknowledgement, or there is a welcome, and when the didgeridoo played, it just made me feel very connected to this country. I'd like to do another welcome, not related to that, but welcome to National Recycling Week. As an ambassador for that, I drive that message hard, but recycling is really not some happy clappy pat yourself on the back thing. It's transition. We need to get down to refuse and reduce, but that's another story. But I did notice in some of Tristan's photographs those supermarkets where you can just go in and take what you like. I did notice that every single line in that supermarket was in plastic. So there are inherent issues with convenience of distribution, because convenience of distribution requires some form of larger sanitation, which ultimately ends up as plastic wrap. So, just on that note alone, personally, I struggle a little because that's the price we're paying, and until we put a real price on that, we will continue to mount up huge piles of plastic because of convenience. And I think in response to Rachel's comment or your question about, well, what do we want? I certainly don't want a world filled with plastic, and I'll touch on plastic again around the way we can leverage other groups to help tell our stories, because that's the biggest asset we have, a capacity to use other groups. And I'll illustrate how one of my projects is being used to tell the biosecurity story. The future of food. How do I define food? Feud. It is a bit of a feud, isn't it? When you look at some of the things that are potentially projected to happen. And as Rachel's question said, do we want that? You know, each and every one of our actions is having a big impact on education and information. And the more we share and infuse and inject this bigger perspective into the mainstream, then the greater that understanding of food future will be. And then we'll create stakeholders beyond the business stakeholders, but the actual consumer themselves, beyond just that transaction, because they're actually driving the future of agriculture, which is really the topic that we're talking about. We can get waylaid around the other realities associated with agriculture and food distribution, but the real issue we're talking about today is food. How do we define it? I define it as intimate. I define it as habitual. I think habits become routine. Routine becomes culture. Food is about history. It's about learning, and it's about family. To me, it's not about a drone delivering something that has been ordered through a voice-activated machinery for convenience. I want that exchange to be rich with the history of all of the cultures that we come from, and an understanding of the food that we grow, and that it can be prepared in hundreds of different ways. And I think our capacity to cook is intimately connected with the future of food, because if we continue to go down the convenience road, we rely on others to cook the food, and so others are responsible for the most intimate interchange and exchange we have with the world, which is every time we open our gob and put something in, our body is going, what the is this? And it goes into a state of, is this good? Is it bad? What's this? I'll store that there. I don't know how to process that. Spinning wheel of death here, spinning wheel of death there. What's going on inside my gut? Oh, gut reaction. I'll talk about gut reaction in a little while, because, you know, the gut feeling that you're talking about, I think, is where we need to go with a lot of issues around our food. I ask you this question: do you live to eat, or do you eat to live? Okay, that didn't go very far. Wasn't sure. It just came up to me about an hour ago. I thought I'll put that one in there and see what happens. But okay, that must be an eastern state thing. You know, food as a commodity. We've heard that mentioned today, but there are ramifications. And that's really what we're talking about today. What are those ramifications? And where does my role in my work work back? Not because we need to sacrifice, but because it'll be better for us and our health will benefit. So I get excited about these projects. You know, there was a restaurant in Darlinghurst which closed down because it was ahead of its time. Because you know what? She was crazy passionate. I don't know if she was Japanese. I think she might have been Japanese. Anyway, she said, if you come to this restaurant, no leftovers. You cannot, you big rapacious so-and-sos that come here and eat, you know, a quarter of the dish and then just throw it out. Like, she was a bit too mongrel ahead of her time, because people then sort of got upset when she'd go, no, you can't take it. You can't throw it out. You've got to eat it. But you know, these are simple things that we can implement into our kids through school gardens and illustrate that it's not a sign of great wealth to leave food. It's got to go into then tricky recipes to cook leftovers. So, I mean, this is the world that I inhabit. And, you know, I was thinking when I was listening to some of this, you know, where's this all fit in? And I go, man, this fits in. This so fits into what we're talking about here. Because that then affects right up the train, whether you're talking about Julian's work or Tristan's work. Because when the people are informed, then they make the decisions and they dictate how our farmers operate. You know, there's a big question. I mean, Tristan, you asked it. You know, is it the supermarkets that are dictating how people buy? Or is it the consumers? You know, it's both. I think the consumers can change it very quickly if they're informed. Because, I mean, I look at something like imperfect pigs, right? And I go, oh, okay, I'll take it as a transition for a little while, but I'm not going to buy it. I'm sorry. No, I'm not going to buy what I'm saying, I'm not going to buy the concept, because those wonky vegetables took the same amount of water and the same amount of effort for the farmer, and what's happening, they're being bought off them for nothing and still being sold for money as a feel-good mission statement, social benefit to the organisation. I think we need to use that for a period of time and then say, enough, we've learnt, we understand that wonky vegetable that looks like two people rolling around under the sheets is actually a happy carrot, and it's got as much nutrition as one that's perfect. Oh, I think that might be, is that a wrap up? 5 minutes, oh, geez, that's all good, that's my intro. I've been working on a project in the Sanford Commons in Brisbane where, you know, they took over an old CSIRO site, and I want to work with the TAFE, with the department, with the local council, and say, okay, if you're going to build suburbs, let's have a productive market garden in every suburb. Like, that's part of the deal. So whether you're council here today or whether you're state legislators, let's start to do that. There's so many ways we can bring agriculture in. So imagine that, and imagine if it's through the TAFE, and then you've got the carpentry students building a tiny house for the farmer student, the ag student, to live in the tiny house on the farm, in the suburb, feeding the locals, and that's part of their gig for their first year out of TAFE to get their qualification. Imagine that. And then there's community plots around that so that the locals can learn how to grow their own, but there's the farm there feeding. Like, these are ideas. I mean, I'm just throwing it out there. Don't you know, add to it, please. But this is what we can do. We can collaborate with the farming knowledge. We know that farmers are moving beyond the 60-something plus. You know, imagine being able to get all the farmers as they're starting to ease back and bring them into a TAFE program and say, share your knowledge with these young kids to make farmers, like Farmer Incubator in Melbourne. That's a project that takes young wannabe farmers and they run them through over 12 months, and they meet once a fortnight, and they get a garlic crop, and they grow a garlic crop over 9 months. And then they come away, guess what, with coin. It's not like, oh, you know, go and do that for nothing. It's actually, no, let's change that. Let's change that. You make a proper profitable crop. And I went and bought, particularly, I bought $90 worth of seed material, and I planted this great crop on my street and in my backyard. And then I was away, in and out for multiple weeks, and guess what? The sulphur-crested cockatoos just decimated it. But at least the money went to a good cause. But Farmer Incubator, there's good projects out there. I'm working on a kids' TV project called Get Grubby TV. And that's all about actions from the heart. It's about getting kids to think, feel and act. And as a result of that, we actually met people from Biosecurity Australia, and they've asked us to do a project on biosecurity to get the message out there. Because when the department tells a story, it's with a stick. And most people go, oh. Whereas here we are, Dirt Girl, Scrap Boy and Costa the Garden Gnome, telling the story of biosecurity through the Indigenous ranges. Now, that's the sort of storytelling collaboration that each and every one of us could work towards in our networks to help get our message across with new angles. And that's where my comment about the prawns, the white spot on the prawns. And then we've got drift nets. We've got drift nets floating around, as vectors, bringing green mussels into the Great Barrier Reef and so on. So getting involved with beach cleanup groups like Tangaroa Blue and Take 3 is as important to agriculture as all of the other issues that we've discussed today. Because we can lose, as we know with the bananas, and we now know with the prawns, we can lose all of the good work very quickly. And as time goes on, and as Julian said, our nature gets tighter, our biosecurity will have to tighten up as well, because more and more people will want to go into the national parks. They'll move around with their swags. They'll get stuff in their radiators. They'll walk seeds around on their boots. So you know, it's all an integrated part of the future of food, because we need the biosecurity to have the biodiversity on the rest of our landscape. And I love the way it all sleeves together. So for me, it's about the farming of the mind, but equally the farming of the gut. Because the gut is our inner composting system. That's where we think about. That's where we chew the ideas over. That's like what I said, where we interface with the world. And as Jeff said, when we go with that gut feeling, when we start to bring the heart into these decisions, we will collectively, in our individual roles, and whether that's top in the planning legislative tiers, or whether it's in the public street, garden, school, wherever it is, we will come together like a wicking bed. And that's what I believe is the real future of food. When we can wick down, when roots can come down from the top and the water can wick up and the ideas wick up from the bottom, then we'll have a fusion in the middle that will answer Rachel's question about what do we want to leave behind as legacy, because our decisions now are going to carry for the next century. That's how important it is. So thank you for the opportunity to come and talk today, and thanks for backing this event, because I think it's a really good thing. Thanks. Where does my role as a citizen, where does my role as a community leader or a community role model, where does that fit in terms of those ramifications? And I think today we've had a lot of questions around value. And we've touched a little on the next element of value, which is values. And I think when we put those two on the scale, everything we've spoken about today, whether it's Julian and the big picture sort of, or right down to the detail of how much irrigation you put onto that plant or that crop, either way, they're all on there in this balance, this balancing act between value and values. And I think what's happening is that cheap, that word cheap, think of it, cheap. Everything's about cheap, and it's hijacked how we grow our values around food. But I'm happy to say that in my travels, I'm seeing the growth of a holistic approach to food by many people at all ends of the spectrum, from the top down and, most important, from the bottom up. You know, Alana mentioned that, you know, she had her period where she got into permaculture and was a bit of a hippie, and then she grew out of it. Well, that was my only point that I wanted to say to her. I said, there is no growing out of that. You know, this is the circle that we're now come around to. And I'm actually in the process, on my way over here, I was in the process, so I actually spent quite a few hours on the flight writing a foreword for David Holmgren, who co-wrote and founded permaculture with Bill Mollison. He's writing a book called Retro Suburbia. Or it's not written, he's not writing it, he's written it. And I was getting my head around just what this means. And yeah, in terms of this concept, it means, and in terms of what Alana was saying, yeah, we've just gone around the block. You know, they hit a point back there in the early 80s where, you know, big is better and consumption, and we've got endless materials, and they took the right-hand turn, and all that's happened is we've just come around the block and we've got this decision again. We're at this critical decision point again. And I think it's amazing that there's David with the next tome. Totally 30 more years of understanding that this is the choice now, and I'm quite excited about that. And, you know, the point where you had groups like Milkwood Permaculture coming out and running courses and running it at that more urban crowd. And it's now become a food conversation. When Joel Salatin first came to the country about 8 or 9 years ago, I went around and introduced him. One of the first talks was in Brisbane, and then Kim Cruz and Regen Ag up in the far north, in the Atherton. They hosted him along with Regrarians, Darren Doherty and Ben from Taranaki Farm. But, you know, when Joel first came out, people were like, oh, what's this? Oh, you know, he's a bit sort of like, oh. And what happened was, it was through the work of these people that they approached the NRMs and hung in there. And then the NRMs have just gone, ooh, interesting interface. Non-government, just kind of like, well, let's get this in here. And what's happening now? Here we have the minister talking. Like I was sitting there, I was going, did I hear that? Did I hear that regenerative conversation happening at that level? My God, that is cause for not ultimate celebration, but it's cause for wonderful ratcheting of this movement. Boom, we're there. Now, let's move another notch. I was really excited to hear that coming out from Alana in her capacity as a Member of Parliament and looking forward. Because it is the language of communication. It's the vocabulary that we use. If we don't use the future of food vocabulary, no one's going to talk about it. It's just going to get lost in the business hurricane that, Tristan, as a weather forecaster, was predicting. But speaking of weather forecasters, Graham Creed on the ABC. I was actually listening to him the other day, and he's growing garlic up on the north coast of New South Wales, and he's growing a biodiversity crop of Manuka tea tree. This is the weather man from the ABC, and he's making a go of it. He's making a go of garlic, and yet to be the honey, because the crop's yet to grow. But that was just a slight detour there, but somehow the idea of the forecaster that Tristan was. But I think that's the detail. These are small-scale operations that are making farming profitable. And this is that other change of consciousness that small is not profitable. In a changing and uncertain climate and landscape, smaller, resilient, modular farming operations will be the ones whose flags are still flying when major events hit. And that's what I think is exciting about this group gathering, because it's not them over them or us over them. It's a combination. And when we work together and understand that we have commodity-based, but we also have local, regional, food security-based, food predictability, because if we use the word security, that can we need to explain that a little clearer, as I was talking to Rowan, I think it was. I was filming this week in terms of small-scale farming operations. Pocket City Farm, the old Camperdown Bowling Club, turned into a functional farming operation right in the heart of Camperdown in Sydney. Right here in Perth, you have amazing things going on here. Now, you've probably heard of Urban Food Street, which was the best urban verge growing project in the country until the council decided that they wanted to interfere with it after 9 years. And recently I came out to Perth because Pete Stanley from the Verge... Pete, you're here, I think, somewhere. Yeah, oh, there he is. What's your... Verge Projects Australia. Right here in WA at the moment, on the East Coast, we've got councils fluctuating. Some are for it, some make problems, some have more guidelines, some have more policy. But here in WA, through Chris Cornish and City of Bayswater, he's been chipping away for 4 or 5 years. City of Bayswater's going, right, let's do it. Let's grow food. Let's incorporate food into existing parks. Now, you might say, okay, as a commodity thing, that's not going to solve the food issue. But what's it doing? It's educating people. And when we educate people, then they come into this forum as pure stakeholders, and then they will drive people like Alana and say, we want policy change so that some big multinational can't necessarily come in and push aside our biodiversity laws. We need that education and that understanding, so we build this so-called flat, really flat, inclusive future of our food. So I don't underestimate in the slightest the power of someone growing one pot of food, because then they're changing the quality and they will not settle for something that's driven across the Nullarbor. And they'll say, well, why are we driving ours over there and we're not keeping and supplying our market here? Which is what I really think about your opportunity here as WA. And I was talking with the speakers last night. You're an island. You are an island. Now, an island is awesome because you know exactly what's coming in and out. Like on the East Coast, it's very hard to set up a project because the influences stretch and your inputs and your outputs and the throughputs are very hard to contain. Whereas here you can say, all right, we're growing this, we need that, we'll export that, we'll make sure we keep a bit to feed our local and regional needs, and then we'll clean up on our exports because we'll have a regional and state-based or island-based mongrel mentality that says, grown in WA, nick off. It's the best in the world. try everyone else and then come and pay for ours, because you will come. And you know, it's the same with somewhere like Alice Springs. They've been able to implement a whole lot of sustainability measures because they can control it. It's an isolated place. And it's similar with Darwin too. So my thoughts on it are that I think you as a state need to celebrate what your regional identity is. And it's unique. It's not the East Coast, it's WA. Cop that. Here I am, selling it on for you. You know, and other groups doing really good work, like Australian City Farm and Community Garden Movement. Again, bringing together a map of all these gardens so people can go and learn and get ideas and start to grow food locally. You come to a place, go and learn. That helps drive the work of Pete and the Verge Garden Movement, which gets education out even further. And the Community Garden Movement then goes into schools and does things there. I was in Nowra East, whatever day it is, Sunday, for their community garden working bee. But the school has given the community garden, their school garden, over to the community. So it's called the Nowra East Community Garden. There's your ownership. There's your stakeholder buy-in. Now, Nowra East is a disadvantaged community. They're actually now going out and planting the streets with edibles in and around the kids' homes. But they've got a project going where they want to set up a community kitchen. Because then when you get the community kitchen in there and you show the community how they can cook very cheaply, you don't need 300 or 400 grams of chicken per person. 400 grams, one serve into a big bowl of soup with all the vegetables, which I was told the recipe by a wonderful Vietnamese lady from the community. She said, I can feed 10 people with 400 grams and they'll be full. So you think all this thing around, oh, we need more food. No, we just need to cook food appropriately. Down to the recipe, literally down to the recipe. So you're going to have some water and some veggies in it, some noodles, some fresh grown veggies, a whole lot of herbs, and a tiny little bit of meat, if you want meat. But this is that layer where we can shutter it down, take the aperture right down and go, yeah, let's just cut it